Imagine standing at the edge of the Red Sea with the waters before you and the armies of Pharaoh charging behind. That is fear. That is anxiety. That is worry, cornering you, overwhelming you, convincing you that there's no way forward and no way back. But what did God say? He didn't say turn around. He didn't say surrender. He said move forward. Fear, worry, and anxiety are not just emotions. They are spiritual battles. That truth, though simple, is profound. Most people live their lives believing that fear is just something natural. That worry is just a part of being responsible. That anxiety is a medical condition or a reaction to stress. But what if I told you that beneath these feelings lies something much deeper, a war being fought in the invisible realm? What if I told you that these are not simply responses to the circumstances of life, but weapons of spiritual warfare aimed at the soul? From the very beginning, fear has been used as a tool to separate man from God. In the Garden of Eden, after Adam and Eve sinned, the first thing they did was hide. And when God asked why, Adam answered, I was afraid. Fear was not present before the fall. It entered with sin. It came as a result of broken communion with the Creator. Fear was never meant to be part of human life. It is not part of the original design. It is foreign, invasive, and corrupting. And yet it is everywhere. Why? Because the enemy of your soul knows that if he can get you to live in fear, he can keep you from walking in faith. He knows that if he can get you to dwell in worry, he can steal your joy and cripple your witness. He knows that if he can fill you with anxiety, he can distract you from your destiny. The battlefield is not just in your mind, it is in your spirit. That's why the Apostle Paul, writing from a prison cell, said, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Notice what he says, not just that fear is a feeling, but that it is a spirit. That means it's not just something you feel, it's something that seeks to influence, control, and ultimately enslave. And it does not come from God. If fear does not come from him, then where does it come from? It comes from the accuser. It comes from the enemy of your soul. And if it comes from the enemy, then your battle is not psychological. It is spiritual. Worry is not wisdom. Many wear worry like a badge of honor, thinking it means they are being careful, responsible, or thoughtful. But worry is not a fruit of the Spirit. Worry is a thief. It robs you of peace. It robs you of peace. It robs you of sleep. It robs you of trust. Worry says, God may not come through this time. Worry is a declaration of mistrust in the sovereignty of God. And though it may feel like a small thing, just a few thoughts spiraling at the end of a long day, in reality, it is a foothold for the enemy. Worry builds strongholds in the mind, lies that begin to harden like stone until it becomes difficult to believe, difficult to hope, difficult to pray. It is not a mild emotion. It is a subtle war. Anxiety, too, is more than emotion. It is a condition of the soul when it forgets who God is. When you are anxious, you are often filled with a what-ifs and imaginations of things that may never happen. You begin to live in a future that does not exist, gripped by things that haven't even come to pass. Anxiety is the manifestation of misplaced trust. It is the heart saying, I have to control what only God can. And in doing so, you place yourself under a burden you were never meant to carry. That's why Jesus said, do not worry about tomorrow. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. Not because he doesn't understand your pain or concerns, but because he knows the cost of living outside his peace. He knows that fear chokes the seed of the word. He knows that worry dries up the joy of salvation. He knows that anxiety pulls your eyes from heaven and fixes them on the storm. Fear, worry, and anxiety as mere emotions is to fight the wrong war. You cannot defeat a spiritual enemy with natural weapons. You cannot overcome the darkness with logic or calm your soul with distraction. The only way to win is to go to the one who has already won. Who has already won. The only answer is in the Spirit, because when the Spirit of God comes in, the spirit of fear must go out. Where he dwells, fear cannot. Where his word is believed, anxiety must be silenced. Where his love is received, worry dissolves. Received, worry dissolves. The word says, a perfect love casts out fear. That is not just a poetic idea, it is a spiritual law. The love of God is not a feeling, it is a force that defeated death. It is the power that shattered the grave. It is the power that shattered the grave. It is the answer to every lie of the enemy. When you know you are loved, you stop fearing judgment. When you know you are his, you stop worrying about tomorrow. When you know he is with you, anxiety loses its grip. Fear, worry, and anxiety may knock on your door, but they don't have to come in. They may rise up, but they don't have to rule. You were not created to live in chains. You were not redeemed to walk in torment. You were a child of the living God, and the same power that raised Christ from the dead lives in you. So stand, resist the spirit of fear, rebuke the lies of worry, reject the weight of anxiety, and walk in the truth. Because this is not just a battle of emotion. It is a war for your spirit. And in him, the victory is already won. You were never meant to live as a prisoner of fear. Your calling is freedom. That truth is not just a comforting phrase. It is a declaration of your identity and purpose. From the beginning of creation, you were formed in the image of God. Not a God of fear, but of power, of boldness, of perfect peace. You were not formed in chains, not shaped by trembling hands, but crafted by the hands of the Almighty with intention, with destiny, with authority. Fear is not your inheritance. Bondage is not your birthright. You were born for freedom. Fear is a thief. It doesn't announce itself politely. It creeps in silently, gradually, until it takes hold. It starts with a hesitation, a doubt, a moment of uncertainty. And if left unchecked, it begins to spread like a poison, weakening your faith, draining your courage, blinding your vision. Fear will build walls around your heart, not to protect you, but to imprison you. It convinces you that safety lies in silence and shrinking back, in avoiding the unknown. But the truth is, fear is a liar. It is not your guide. It is not your protector. It is your jailer. You were not born again to live in a cage. Christ did not die so that you could live in survival mode. He came to set the captives free. That includes you. That includes the fear that has kept you from stepping into your calling, the anxiety that has held you back from trusting fully, the worry that whispers lies in the night. Freedom is not just a distant hope. It is your spiritual inheritance. You were saved not only from something, but for something. And you cannot fulfill your purpose while enslaved to fear. Look through the Word, and you will find that every person God called had to confront fear. Abraham had to leave everything he knew. Moses had to return to the place of his past. Joshua had to step into the unknown. Esther had to face death. David had to stand before a giant. And every time, fear was present, but it was never meant to. The difference between those who walked in their calling and those who fell short was not the absence of fear, but the decision to rise above it. Freedom does not mean you will never feel fear. It means fear will not be your master. The enemy wants you to believe that fear is just part of life, that it's normal, that it's even wise. But fear tolerated is faith contaminated. When you let fear dictate your actions, your decisions, your relationships, you begin to live not by the Spirit, but by the flesh. Flesh. And the Spirit does not lead through fear. The Spirit leads through peace, through truth, through conviction, not through torment. The moment you begin to obey fear, you step out of the freedom Christ purchased for you. Freedom is not just the absence of fear. It is the presence of boldness, of clarity, of unshakable peace. It is the ability to walk through the fire and not be burned because you know who walks with you. It is standing in front of what once terrified you and declaring, I will not bow. It is knowing that even when the storm rages, your anchor holds. That kind of freedom cannot be given by the world, and it cannot be taken by the world. It is supernatural, it is divine, and it is yours, but it must be chosen. God will not force you to be free. He will not drag you out of your prison. He will break the chains. He will open the doors, but you must rise. You must walk out. You must leave behind the comfort of captivity and embrace the uncertainty of freedom. Freedom will cost you something. It will cost you something. It will cost you your excuses. It will cost you your complacency. It will cost you the lies you've believed and the identity you've built around your fear. But what you gain in return is immeasurable. Joy, peace, power, purpose in the presence of God in full. The enemy trembles at the thought of you discovering who you really are. He's not afraid of your weakness. He's afraid of your calling. He knows that once you walk in freedom, you become dangerous. You become a testimony. You become a light in the darkness, or a weapon in the hand of God. Odd. And so he tries to keep you small, silent, stuck. But you were never created to live behind bars built of fear. You were created to run, to build, to speak, to love, to shine. You were created to walk boldly into your destiny with the fire of heaven in your soul. There is a voice calling you higher, deeper, further, and that voice is not fear. That voice is truth. That voice is freedom. That voice is freedom. That voice is the voice of the one who said, do not fear, for I am with you. The chains are already broken. The door is already open. The prison has already lost its power for you to fall. All that remains is for you to rise, to believe, and to walk in the truth. You were never meant to live as a prisoner of fear. Your calling is freedom. Now, life like it. The enemy uses anxiety to paralyze your destiny and silence your faith. That's not a metaphor. That's a strategy. It's a calculated assault on the calling placed over your life. Anxiety may seem like a simple emotion, a reaction to stress, a passing feeling in the heart, or a racing thought in the mind. But in the spiritual realm, it is a weapon. It is not random. It is not random. It is not harmless. It is precise and poisonous. It does not come to merely discomfort you. It comes to disarm you. It doesn't just come to make you nervous. It comes to stop you from moving forward into the purpose God created you for. The destiny is not a passive thing. It doesn't happen automatically. Destiny requires action. It requires movement and it requires obedience. And if the enemy can keep you frozen in fear, stuck in cycles of worry, distracted by spirals of what ifs and what could go wrongs, then he doesn't have to destroy your life outright. He just has to delay it, interrupt it, or keep you from ever stepping into it. Anxiety doesn't always scream. Often it whispers. It floods your heart with doubt. It magnifies the unknown. It tells you to wait, to hesitate, to delay. It says, oh, you're not ready. Or what if you fail? Or what if you fail? Or what if you're not enough? And slowly, what could have been a bold step of faith becomes a plan postponed, a dream shelved, a life stalled. The enemy has no authority to take away the calling God placed on your life, but he will do everything to convince you to forfeit it. Anxiety is one of his most effective tools because it doesn't feel like rebellion. It feels like responsibility. It disguises itself as caution. It wears the mask of wisdom. But while godly wisdom brings peace, anxiety brings confusion and torment. And where there is torment, the enemy is at work. He knows that if he can get your mind spinning, he can drown out the voice of God. He knows that if he can get your heart racing, he can keep you from resting in the promises that were spoken over you. Anxiety is more than just emotion. It's a spiritual fog. It clouds your vision so you can't see clearly. It blinds you to the truth of who God is and who you are in him. It causes you to shrink, to play small, to settle for less. It convinces you that the giant is too big, the water's too deep, the future too uncertain. But the truth is, the enemy uses anxiety not because you're weak, but because you're powerful. He uses it because he's afraid of what happens if you walk in boldness. He's afraid of what happens if you move forward, if you step out, if you pray with faith, speak with authority, act with courage. Faith is your weapon. It is the bridge between what is and what God has promised. Faith says, I don't see the way, but I trust the one who is the way. Faith doesn't need everything to make sense. Faith doesn't bow to fear. Faith moves mountains, shuts the mouths of lions, and parts seas. That is why the enemy targets your faith with anxiety. Because if he can silence your faith, he can weaken your prayers. And if your prayers are weakened, your spiritual power is diminished. A silent believer is no threat to the kingdom of darkness. Anxiety, when left unchallenged, leads to unbelief. It causes you to question the goodness of God. It replaces trust with suspicion. It puts more weight on your circumstances than on his promises. And when anxiety takes root, it is not content to stay in the mind. It seeps into the heart, the decisions, the behavior, and eventually into your identity. You start defining yourself by your fears instead of your faith. You begin to say, I can't, when God has said, you will. You start staying behind when God is calling you forward. But anxiety has no rightful place in the life of a child of God. It is not your companion. It is not your inheritance. You were never meant to carry the burden of the future. That belongs to God. You were never meant to figure it all out. That's the job of the one who holds time and eternity in his hands. Your only task is to believe, to walk, to trust. When anxiety rises, it's not a sign to retreat. It's a sign to press in. It's a signal to lean on him, not yourself. It's a moment to speak truth louder than the lies. You are not called to live under the shadow of fear. You are called to live under the covering of grace. The enemy may use anxiety as a weapon, but your faith is a shield. The word of God is your sword. The promises of God are your anchor. And your destiny is not subject to the lies of the enemy. It is rooted in the unchanging plans of the Almighty. You were not created to be paralyzed. You were not formed to be silent. You were called, chosen, appointed, and anointed for such a time as this. So cast down every anxious thought. Tear down every lie. Declare the truth. Walk by faith. And when the enemy tries to use anxiety to paralyze your destiny and silence your faith, remind him that your future is already secured, your voice is already empowered, and your God is already victorious. The battle is real, but the war is already won. God has given you authority to overcome, not in your strength, but in his. That is more than a statement. It is a divine truth. It is the foundation of victory, the secret behind every breakthrough, and the answer to every battle you face. You were never expected to conquer life's trials on your own. You were never expected to fight fear, anxiety, temptation, or adversity with your own resources. From the beginning, God knew that your strength would fall short. He knew your limitations. He saw your weaknesses, and still, he called you. Says the kids. Still, he equipped you. Still, he entrusted you with authority, not because of who you are, but because of who he is in you. There is a reason Scripture says, not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord, because human strength can only go so far. Human wisdom will only take you to the edge of the impossible, but authority from God carries you beyond the edge. It steps into the realm where miracles happen, where mountains move, where walls fall, where the impossible becomes reality. This authority is not born out of talent, experience, or title. It is born out of relationship, the relationship between the Creator and his child. When you belong to him, you carry his name. And when you carry his name, you carry his power. Too often people live as though they are powerless. They pray as if God is far away. They speak as if they are victims of their circumstances, but God has not called you to live in defeat. He has called you to walk in victory, and that victory doesn't come from trying harder. It comes from surrendering deeper. It comes from realizing that you are not the source of strength, but you are connected to the one who is strength itself. The same power that raised Jesus from the dead is alive in you. That's not poetic language. It's a spiritual reality. Authority is not arrogance. It's not self-confidence. It's not pride in your own ability. Authority is the confidence that comes from knowing who sent you. Think of a soldier. He may be small in stature, but when he wears the uniform and carries the badge of his nation, he operates in the authority of something far greater than himself. It's not about his physical strength, it's about the power backing him. So it is with you. You have been clothed in Christ. You have been sealed by the Spirit. You don't face the enemy in your name. You face him in his. That's why David could run toward Goliath when everyone else was running away. He wasn't stronger than the giant. He wasn't more experienced in battle, but he knew whose name he came in. He said, "You come to me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts." That is the declaration of authority. And with one stone, one act of faith, empowered by divine authority, the giant fell. Not because of David's strength, but because of God's. This authority isn't limited to Bible heroes. It's available to you right now. Jesus said, "I give you authority to trample on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means harm you." That means the authority to overcome fear, addiction, shame, lies, and any spiritual force that tries to stand in your way is already in your possession. It's not something you earn, it's something you receive. It's not activated by striving, it's activated by faith. Yet many people walk through life defeated, not because the enemy is stronger, but because they've never stepped into the authority they've been given. Authority unrecognized is authority unused. If you don't believe you have power, you won't live like it. If you don't believe God has equipped you, you will keep shrinking back when he's called you to rise up. But once you realize who you are and whose Spirit lives in you, everything changes. You begin to speak differently. You begin to pray with boldness. You begin to face battles with peace instead of panic. You're not fighting for victory. You're fighting from victory. Jesus already won the war. The cross already crushed the curse. The resurrection already broke the grip of death and hell. And now that victory lives in you. You are more than a conqueror, not because of what you can do, but because of what he already did. The strength you need doesn't come from within you. It flows through you from the one who sits on the throne. So when the storm comes, don't stand in your own power. Stand in his. When fear whispers, don't answer with your own words. Answer with his word. When the enemy tries to tell you you're not enough, remind him that you serve the one who is more than enough. And when you feel like giving up, remember that the one who gave you authority will never leave you, never forsake you, and never fail. You are not a victim. You are not abandoned. You are not helpless. You are a child of God, filled with his Spirit, marked by his grace, and armed with his authority. Yeah. You were not created to barely make it through. You were created to overcome, and you will, not by your strength, but by his. Victory comes not by avoiding the storm, but by walking through it with him. That is the truth that separates surface faith from deep-rooted trust. It's the revelation that breaks the illusion that a life with God means a life without struggle. From the very beginning, the walk of faith has never been a walk around the storm. It has always been a walk through it, hand in hand with the one who commands the wind and the waves. So many people spend their lives praying for the storm to pass. They plead for comfort, for escape, for a path that is smooth and calm. But if you look through the Word, you'll see that the greatest victories, the most powerful testimonies, the most life-changing encounters with God, they didn't come from peaceful places. They came in the middle of the storm, in the fiery furnace, in the lion's den, in the prison cell, in the wilderness, on the battlefield, not when everything was easy, but when everything was impossible, except for God. The storm is not your enemy when God is with you. The storm becomes a place of encounter. It becomes a place of refining, of revealing, of strengthening. You may not like the wind. You may not understand the lightning. You may tremble at the thunder, but God does not waste the storm. He uses it. He shapes you in it. He strips away what doesn't belong. It teaches you what it means to trust when you can't see. And he walks with you every step of the way. There is something about the storm that reveals what's real. It exposes false security. It breaks down illusions. It brings to the surface what's hidden beneath. When everything is shaken, you find out what your faith is built on. That's why avoiding the storm can sometimes mean avoiding the very place where your faith grows roots. You can't have resurrection without a cross. You can't have triumph without a trial. And you can't know the fullness of his power unless you've been in a place where your own strength wasn't enough. Victory isn't found in the absence of adversity. It's found in his presence within the adversity. When Jesus walked on water, the storm didn't stop first. The wind was still howling. The waves were still crashing. And yet he walked, not in spite of the storm, in the middle of it. And Peter, when he fixed his eyes on Jesus, walked too. It wasn't the calm that gave Peter the ability to walk. It was the presence of Jesus. And the moment he took his eyes off the master and looked at the storm, he sank. That's the picture of so many hearts today. Fear doesn't come from the storm itself. It comes when we forget who's walking beside us. God doesn't promise a life free of storms, but he does promise that he will never leave you in them. He promises that no matter how fierce the winds, how dark the clouds, how violent the waves, you will never face them alone. That's why you can have peace in the storm. That's why you can sing in the midnight hour. That's why you can stand when everything around you says, run, because the one who calms the storm also walks with you through it. The enemy wants you to believe that the storm means God has left you, that the presence of trouble is the absence of grace, but that is a lie. The storm doesn't mean God is absent. Sometimes it means he is closer than ever. Sometimes he uses the storm to silence every other voice so you can finally hear his. Sometimes he lets the wind rise so that your dependence on him can rise even higher. Not because he delights in your struggle, but because he's preparing you for something greater than your comfort. He's preparing you for your calling. When Israel crossed the Red Sea, it wasn't on a sunny day with still waters. The sea was raging and the army of Egypt was closing in. But God didn't remove the sea, he split it. He made a way through, not around. And the same God who parted the waters then is still the one who goes before you now. The path may not look like what you expected. It may not be easy. But if he is leading you, it is victorious. Victory is not the absence of scars. It is the presence of grace in the midst of the battle. It is not comfort that marks the overcomer, but perseverance. You might come through with tears. You might come through with wounds, but you will come through. And when you do, you will know him more deeply. You will trust him more fully. And you will speak with a new kind of authority, not theory, but testimony. Not secondhand knowledge, but firsthand encounter. So don't fear the storm. Don't pray only for it to pass. Pray for the strength to walk through it with him. Fix your eyes on the one who has never lost a battle. Anchor your heart in the truth that you are not alone. And remember, victory does not come by avoiding the storm. Victory comes by walking through it with the one who commands it to be still. And when you walk with him, the storm may rage, but it will never have the final word. The presence of God is the antidote to every fear. That is not just a comforting phrase. It is the ultimate truth for every soul caught in the grip of anxiety, panic, worry, or dread. Fear thrives in the absence of certainty, in the darkness of the unknown, in the silence where hope seems lost. But fear cannot coexist with the manifest presence of the living God. Wherever God is, fear loses its power. It may try to rise, but it cannot remain. Because the presence of God does not just comfort, it transforms. It doesn't just soothe the mind, it silences the storm. When you stand in his presence, fear is exposed for what it truly is: a shadow, a lie, a distortion. It pretends to be powerful, but in the light of his glory, it crumbles. The reason fear feels overwhelming is because we look at life through the lens of our limitations. We focus on what we can't control, what we don't understand, and what we cannot predict. But the presence of God shifts the focus from self to Savior, from problem to provider, from impossibility to the one for whom all things are possible. Moses stood before a burning bush and trembled at the thought of facing Pharaoh. He was full of fear, full of excuses, but God's response wasn't a strategy or a pep talk. It was a promise. I will be with you. That was enough. Not that Moses was strong, not that the road would be easy, but that God would be present. That same promise was given to Joshua, trembling before leading a nation into the promised land. It was given to Gideon, hiding in fear. It was given to Jeremiah, too young and too weak. And it is given to you, and it is given to you. His presence is not an accessory, it is your lifeline. It is not for a few chosen people. It is for all who call on his name. Fear is always loudest when God feels distant. That is why the enemy works so hard to make you forget that God is near. He floods your mind with distractions, fills your heart with dread, and surrounds your path with confusion, all to make you feel alone. Because if you believe you are alone, you will believe the lie that you are vulnerable, defenseless, and doomed. But you are not alone. You have never been alone. You have never been alone. The God who knit you together, who breathed life into your soul, who numbers the hairs on your head, he is with you even now. The antidote to fear is not found in control, but in surrender. It is not found in knowledge of the future, but in trust in the one who holds the future. And trust comes from relationship. The more time you spend in the presence of God, the more you realize how safe you truly are. Not because the world isn't dangerous, but because your life is in the hands of the Almighty. Psalm 91 doesn't promise a life without trouble. It promises protection in the midst of it for those who dwell in the secret place of the Most High. The word is a dwell, not visit. Fear grows when we visit God occasionally, but faith grows when we dwell with him continually. In his presence, fear loses its grip because truth takes its place. You begin to remember that he is your refuge and your fortress. You remember that he goes before you and surrounds you. You remember that nothing can separate you from his love, not tribulation or distress or persecution or danger. Perfect love casts out fear, and perfect love lives in the presence of the one who is love itself. The presence of God does not just change the atmosphere, it changes you. It calms the storm inside, even when the storm outside rages on. It gives you peace that passes understanding, joy that cannot be stolen, and strength that endures. This is not theory. This is reality for the one who makes the presence of God their dwelling place. Fear has no permanent place in a heart that is anchored in him. So many people search for peace through distractions, through entertainment, through success, through relationships, through achievements. But those things only numb fear temporarily. They do not uproot it. They do not uproot it. They do not destroy it. Only the presence of God does that, because only God can speak to the very core of who you are and say, be still. Only he can step into the prison cell of your thoughts and open the door with his word. Only he can quiet the raging sea with a single command. And when he does, you will know what true peace feels like, not the absence of problems, but the presence of the Prince of Peace. The presence of God is not a distant theological concept. It is not reserved for the elite or the spiritual giants. It is near. It is available. And it is more powerful than any fear you face. When you worship, he draws near. When you pray, he leans in. When you open your heart, he fills it. And when he fills it, fear has no room to remain. So do not run from fear. Run into his presence. When the enemy whispers lies, run into the truth. When the storm howls, run to the one who walks on waves. When the darkness surrounds, run to the light that never goes out. Because the presence of God is not only the antidote to fear, It is the answer to everything.